In Grant County, New Mexico Territory, in the high desert south of Bayard, on a ranch called Esperanza that did not have any horses worth expecting much from, a woman of 24 walked into the main house on the 18th of August, 1881, and said she was a trained nurse. She was not. The man who hired her knew that. The man who hired her was named Clayton Merrick, and he was 55 years old, and he was lying on a bed that had been moved into what used to be a parlor. Because the stairs had become, as of Tuesday, impossible, his lungs were going the way his wife's had gone, which was slow and loud and without mercy, and he had roughly 6 months to get his business settled and his son taught to run a ranch and his daughter to stop hating him, which was not time enough even if he had nothing else to do. He took one look at the woman standing in his doorway with a carpet bag and a book bound in green cloth, and he understood everything she was not. She was thin. She was hungry. She had been sleeping in her clothes for long enough that they had begun to smell of honest sweat instead of soap. She had a letter of reference from a doctor in Silver City that she held with both hands like a prayer. The letter was good and specific and entirely false. He had been married to a school teacher for 22 years, and he had learned to read the shape of a lie when it was handed to him on paper, and this lie had the curve of desperation underneath it. "I am able to work immediately," she said. "I have nursing experience with terminal illness. I am familiar with pain management and palliative care, and I do not require much in terms of compensation." "That last part, I believe," said Clayton Merrick. He hired her anyway. Her name was Eleanor Price, or had been when she was born in Montreal in 1857 to a father who traded furs and a mother who read novels in French, and she had come down from Santa Fe 4 weeks before with a man who promised her work and a future. The man had done what such men did, which was to take her money and her savings account book and her grandmother's locket and leave her in an alley behind a saloon with a black eye and a changed understanding of mercy. She had sat on a bench outside the doctor's office in Silver City for an hour and a half, watching physicians come and go in their vests and with their leather bags, and she had looked at the notice for a nursing position on the bulletin board, and she had had exactly enough desperation to walk inside and lie. She lied because she did not know what else to do. She lied because there was a cot in that ranch house, and 3 meals a day that would not be administered by a man with hands that hurt. She lied because Clayton Merrick was not the kind of man who would touch a woman without permission, and because he was going to die, and because someone at his bedside might be better than no one at all. She lied because she had learned at 24 that lying was often the only door that opened. The green cloth book was Eber's Handbook of Domestic Medicine, and she had bought it for 11 cents at a pawn shop in Silver City, and she had carried it with her to the interview as a prop. And she began reading it that first night in the small room off the kitchen at Esperanza, with the focus of someone learning to swim by reading about water. Clayton Merrick lay in his borrowed bed and listened to the sound of the pages turning, hour after hour, and he did not say anything. The ranch had been built by his wife's father in 1861, and it was a good house, solid with thick adobe walls and good windows, and Mary had made it into a place where a man felt like he belonged. She had died in the spring of 1879, and his son James had run the ranch capably for 2 years, and then had gotten an offer from a cattle company up near the Mogollon and had gone north to take it, because he was young, and because he did not want to watch his father die the way he had watched his mother die, and because there is something about seeing a parent decline that makes a person need to leave. His daughter Catherine had come home from Tucson, where she had been married to a man named Hartwell, who turned out to be married already. and she was angry in the particular way of women who had believed one thing and discovered another, and she was not kind to her father's dying, and she was not kind to the strange woman who had arrived to manage it, and she watched Eleanor with the eye of someone waiting for theft. The first week was an audition and an education. Eleanor had never emptied a bedpan, and she was unprepared for the shame of it, for the way a dying man's body becomes an argument between dignity and physics. Clayton did not help. He lay still and pretended not to see her flushed face, and he pretended not to notice when she had to leave the room and come back, and he pretended not to understand the exact moment when she stopped thinking about the lie and started thinking about the person, which was the moment when she came back without the book, without the pretense, and just did the work. She had to ask about the laudanum. She found the amber bottle in the cabinet by the bed and held it like it might bite her, and she came back to his bedside and she said plainly, "I do not know how much to give you or how often." The book does not say clearly. That is because the book was written by someone who believed doctors should tell you the rest, said Clayton Merrick. My physician left instructions. They are in the envelope on the shelf above my head. Read them and do what they say. And Eleanor, do not be ashamed of not knowing. Most people do not know, and they pretend to. That is a different kind of lie. She read the instructions. She gave him the laudanum in calculated drops, and within an hour his breathing eased, and she understood that she had been holding her own breath since the moment she arrived, and now she let it go. By the second week, she had begun to know the shape of his days. He woke at 4 in the morning, almost always, his lungs pulling him into consciousness like fish hooks, and his body drenched with sweat from dreams he did not describe. She began to set her alarm for 3:30 so that she could have water ready, and a cloth, and the small leather journal she had begun keeping of the things that seemed to help, and the things that seemed to make it worse. She wrote in pencil in the margins of Eber's handbook, and she marked pages, and she underlined passages, and she was teaching herself through the only method available to her, the patient combination of reading and watching and trying, and correcting herself when she was wrong. On the 21st day, she made a mistake. She gave him the laudanum at the wrong hour because she had fallen asleep in the chair and lost the time, and she woke to find him struggling, his breath coming in short gasps, and she had to sit him up and hold him and wait for the medicine to clear his blood, and she was certain he would die, and it would be her fault. "It is not your fault," he said, when he could speak. "I forgot to wake you. I went ahead and forgot the time. You did not forget. You trusted me. I failed that trust. No, you are learning. Learning means you will make mistakes. Mistakes mean you are trying. And I have been married to the same woman for 31 years and loved by her, and I can tell you that trying matters more than succeeding." She sat on the edge of his bed, and she cried, and he let her cry, and he did not pretend she had not failed because she had, and he did not pretend that failure did not matter because it did, and he simply sat with her in it. And that was the moment when she stopped lying to herself about why she was staying. By the third week, she had begun to move through the house with less fear. She knew which floorboards creaked. She knew where the good light came in the windows. She knew that the kitchen was cooler at 3 in the afternoon, and that this was where to bring him water when his fever rose. And she knew that he did not like to be touched on his left shoulder, because the lung beneath it was the one that hurt worse. She began to cook things beyond the basic beans and chives that had been her foundation. She asked questions of the neighboring rancher's wife, a woman named Dorothy, who came once a week to see if Clayton needed anything. Dorothy was kind in the way of women who have lived in isolated places and know that kindness is sometimes all a person has to trade. Make him a chicken broth with the roots of garlic, Dorothy said. Not the cloves, the root, and let it simmer a day. Add some whiskey to it if he can tolerate it. His wife used to make that when he was down with fever. Eleanor made the broth. Clayton drank it and his eyes closed, and for a moment she thought he was remembering his wife, but he was simply grateful, and gratitude and memory live very close to each other. "This is good," he said, "but it is not the same broth. Nothing is the same. I miss her. I am sorry I cannot be her. I am not asking you to be. I am asking you to be yourself, and to stay." "You are writing in the book," Clayton said on the morning of the 15th day, when he caught her marking a passage about respiration. "I am learning," she said. "I should have learned before I arrived, but I did not, and this is how I am learning now." "What did you do before the nursing?" She could have lied. The habit of lying was still there, still easy, still the default. But he had told her the truth about the laudanum, and he had not made her feel ashamed, and something in his voice made her think that he was asking because he already knew the answer and was giving her the chance to change it. "I was nothing," she said. "I worked in a boarding house in Santa Fe doing laundry. I came down here with a man who promised me work and a wage, and took my money instead. I slept in an alley for 2 nights. I lied when I came here because I could not think of another choice." Clayton Merrick was quiet for a long time. "You have very good hands," he said finally. "Your hands have always been good. That is not a lie." On the 18th day, Catherine arrived in the afternoon with her carpet bag and her angry face, and her determination to protect what her father did not seem to want protecting. "She is not a nurse," Catherine said, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching Eleanor pour water into a basin with a steadiness that Catherine could not quite dismiss. "I know," said Clayton Merrick. "You know. You know, and you kept her anyway. I did. Why on earth would you do that?" Clayton Merrick was quiet a long time. Eleanor had left the room, had understood that the conversation required her absence, had gone outside to the well house to draw more water, and to stand in the high desert and wonder if she was about to be thrown back out into the world with nothing. "Because," her father said finally, and Catherine had to come closer to hear it, "she needs something, and I have something to give. That intersection point is where a man either helps or does not help, and I have found in my life that helping is generally the better choice, regardless of how imperfect the person being helped might be. She lied to you, Father. She fraudulently represented herself. She did. And she also sat at my bedside for 6 hours last night and did not sleep. And she read me 3 chapters of a book she does not understand, and she made me stop coughing twice because she put a cold cloth on my face and held it there when the cloth was not in any handbook. She lied, and she is doing her best, and she is trying. And that is all any of us ever managed to do." Catherine's face set in the particular way of a woman who had expected to be right and discovered otherwise. She took the stage back to Tucson 2 days later. She left a letter saying her father was a fool, and she would come to the funeral and not before, and that she would not forget this betrayal. The weeks that followed had their own shape and their own rhythm. Eleanor Price learned the geography of his pain. She learned that he slept better when she sat in the chair beside the bed and read aloud, even when she did not understand half of what she was reading. She learned that he drank tea with sage when his lungs were particularly bad. And she learned that the green cloth book was, in fact, more reliable than she had expected. And she learned that there was a difference between lying her way into a position and earning her way into trust. She learned that he had a wife once, and that her name was Mary, and that there was a particular sadness in his voice when he talked about the schoolhouse she had taught in, and about how she had made him learn to read music so that they could play together in the evenings, and how he had been bad at it, and how she had laughed at him, and how he had loved that sound of her laughter more than he had loved almost anything. She would have liked you, he said, on the 29th day, when Eleanor had just brought him broth at 4 a.m. and had sat down to read to him from the newspaper that came from Silver City. I do not think so, Eleanor said. You have described her as intelligent and kind and capable. I am none of those things. You are intelligent, said Clayton. You came here knowing nothing, and you have learned what you needed to learn. You are kind, or you would have left by now. And you are capable, or I would not still be alive. Eleanor did not know what to say to that. She went back to reading the newspaper, and he slept, and she sat in the chair and watched the light come up through the window. The wire came from James on the 30th of August, now 13 days after Eleanor's arrival. James was coming home. James was leaving the job in the north, the job with the cattle company, the job that had seemed to matter when his brother's presence had felt like weakness. James was coming home because his father was dying, and because something had shifted in him that made staying away feel like the wrong choice, and because he had received a letter from his father that said, I have made arrangements that will puzzle you, but I hope you will understand them before you judge them. James was also bringing a lawyer from Silver City named Martin Thorne to manage his father's estate and to review his father's hiring practices and to ensure that no one who was disreputable was taking advantage of a dying man's money or property or trust. Martin Thorne arrived 2 days before James, and he entered the parlor where Clayton lay with his book and Eleanor sat reading the weather report. And he took one look at the woman and understood exactly what Clayton Merrick had understood, which was everything she was not. This woman is not a nurse, Thorne said in the kitchen, in a voice that carried back to the parlor where Clayton lay listening. She is using you. She is taking advantage of a dying man to establish herself in a home and a position that has no legitimate basis. I will need the details of any financial arrangements you have made with her, as they may be subject to revision upon your death. She has been paid $40, Clayton said. $8 a week for 5 weeks. We discussed this compensation when she arrived, and she accepted it. She has not asked for more. She has not asked for anything except the opportunity to do the work. This woman is a criminal, said Thorne. Fraud is fraud, regardless of the motive. That letter of reference was fabricated. I have already sent a wire to the doctor in Silver City. He confirms he has never heard of this woman, and that he wrote no such recommendation. This is not a gray area, Miss Merrick. This is outright deception, and she is likely a thief. Clayton Merrick said nothing for a long moment. I am aware that she lied, he said finally. I have known since the day she arrived. I looked at her hands, and at her face, and at the way she held that book, and I knew that she had never held a stethoscope in her life. Thorne had no response to that. He had expected defensiveness or surprise, or the anger of a man who felt he had been made a fool of. He had not expected calm acceptance. I have not been defrauded, Clayton continued. I have hired someone at an agreed-upon wage to perform a service, and that service has been performed exceeding my expectations. Whether she claims credentials she does not possess does not change the fact that she has done the work. I know what she is not. I have chosen what she is to be in this house. That is my choice to make, and it is my estate to manage, and I will not be lectured about my own morality by a man whose only concern is whether my decisions might create complications for my son. Thorne had the face of a man who had spent his life believing that the world was a competition and that mercy was another word for weakness. He had never forgiven anything, and he did not intend to start. "This will not stand," he said. "When your son returns and understands the situation, he will not allow this woman to remain in his house after you are gone. You are creating a problem that will not be solved by your absence. You are setting the stage for theft and deception, and possibly worse. It is my professional obligation to warn you, and when James Merrick discovers what has transpired here, he will thank me for my vigilance. Then we will find out what kind of man my son is," said Clayton Merrick, "and I have a feeling the answer will disappoint you. Your obligation is to manage my estate according to my wishes," said Clayton Merrick. "My wishes are that Eleanor Price remain employed at Esperanza for as long as she wishes to remain. I will have that put into writing, if it simplifies matters." Eleanor Price heard all of this. She heard it from the hallway where she stood with a breakfast tray and her heart in her throat, and the understanding that she had, in fact, lied her way into a position, and now the reckoning had come, and that the man she had lied to was defending her to a lawyer, and she did not know which was worse, that he knew, or that he was standing by her anyway. She packed her carpet-bag that evening. She left a letter on the table by the window where Clayton read in the morning when his lungs permitted. It said that she had been wrong to lie, and that she was grateful for his kindness, and that she was leaving before she caused more harm. It said that she had learned more from him about what it meant to do something right than she had learned from any other person alive. It said that she had read his wife's name in his voice and understood why he loved her still, and that she hoped his death would be gentle. It said thank you. She was at the gate of the ranch, walking toward the road with the carpet-bag in one hand and the green cloth book in the other, when Clayton Merrick caught up with her. He was in a chair on wheels that his son had sent down from Silver City in the summer of 1879, and he had not used it since his wife died, and he was moving it with his hands, because his arms were still strong even if his lungs were not, and he was moving it fast enough that Eleanor heard him coming. "Get back here," he said. She stopped walking. She did not turn around. "I cannot stay," she said. "That man was right. I lied. I have no right to be here. I will not be the reason you lose your son's respect or cause your business to be questioned or become a source of shame when you are gone." "Get back here," Clayton Merrick said again. She turned around. She came back to the wheelchair, and she stood in front of a dying man in the high desert of New Mexico Territory, and she let him take her hand. "I lied," she said. "When I walked into your house, I lied about everything I was. I am not a nurse. I have never been a nurse. I am a woman who had nothing, and who lied because it was the only door I could see." "Yes," said Clayton Merrick, "and since then you have not lied once. You have asked for help when you needed it. You have learned. You have stayed when you could have left. You have made this bearable for me in a way that was not guaranteed to happen. So here is what I am going to tell you, and I need you to hear it. I do not care what you lied about then. I care about what you have chosen to be now, and what you have chosen to be now is good. So you are staying. You are staying, and you are not going to apologize anymore. And when I die, and when James comes home and understands the situation, he is going to have to decide whether he is the kind of man who honors his father's choices, or whether he is the kind of man who does not. And I have a feeling about which one he is. So you are staying." Eleanor Price stood in front of a dying man in a wheelchair in the high desert, with the last light of August going red on the mountains, and she cried in a way she had not cried since the day she was born. which was the kind of crying that happens when someone tells you that you are worth something and means it. She came back to the house. She put the carpet bag away. She sat at his bedside, and she read to him about remedies she did not believe in and conditions she did not understand, and he slept, and she kept watch. James Merrick came home on the 5th of September, and he rode into the yard in the late afternoon, and he was a man of 32, with his father's bearing and his mother's capacity for kindness. He looked at his father in the borrowed bed, and then he looked at Eleanor Price in the chair beside it, and then he looked at Martin Thorne standing in the doorway with his arms crossed and his judgment written on his face. And he asked one question. Did father know this woman was not a nurse? Yes, said Clayton Merrick. And he kept her anyway? I did, and I would do it again. Then I trust your judgment, said James Merrick, and that was the end of it. Thorne left for Silver City the next day with his fees and his disapproval. Catherine stayed away until after the funeral. Eleanor Price remained. Clayton Merrick lived until the 24th of October, 1881. He died at 4 a.m, with Eleanor in the chair beside his bed and his hand in hers, and his last words were, "Thank you for staying," and she understood that he was talking about everything. James Merrick offered her work at Esperanza after his father died. He offered her a wage and a position with a title, and he offered her this without any doubt or hesitation. And Eleanor Price, who had lied her way into everything she had ever gotten, said yes to the first honest offer of employment she had ever received. He paid her $12 a week. He gave her a room upstairs with a window that looked out over the desert. He asked her to teach him everything she had learned about his father's care, because there was a part of him that had not been there, and he wanted to honor what his father had received. The green cloth book stayed on the shelf by the window where Clayton had read. James added to it over the years, volumes on animal husbandry and range management and cattle prices, but the Eber's handbook remained in the same place. Sometimes Eleanor took it down and looked at the passages she had underlined in her desperate attempt to pass herself off as something she was not, and she understood that the margin notes in pencil were not written by the book's author, but by a woman trying to become worthy of a man's dying, and by a man's acceptance of that trying. She stayed at Esperanza for 14 years. She taught the neighboring children to read in the summers. She did the work of a nurse without ever claiming the title, and she did it well because she had learned it in the only way that matters, which is by doing it for someone she loved. She married James Merrick in the spring of 1883, quietly, with no announcement, in the little adobe chapel at Grant, with Dorothy and 2 neighbors as witnesses. They had 2 children, a daughter they named Mary for his mother, and a son they named Clayton for his father. She was happy in a way that had seemed at 24 impossible, and she was at peace with the fact that this happiness had been built on a lie that became a truth. When Clayton Merrick died, Eleanor had his funeral ring melted down and reformed into a simple band, which she wore for the rest of her life. The green cloth book she kept on a shelf in the parlor, and when her children asked about the pencil marks in the margins, she told them the truth, that it was the record of a woman learning to become worthy of another person's trust, and that sometimes the most important education happens in the margins of books written by people who would never know you were reading them. If your heart has ever leaned toward stories where deception is forgiven and redemption is offered without condition, then this story was for you. Out on the high desert where the light is honest and the sky is big, the love between Clayton Merrick and Eleanor Price became the kind that transforms not because it was based in truth, but because it had the courage to become true. If stories of frontier love that bloomed in the shadow of death, that were built on acceptance rather than judgment, speak to you, follow the lonesome trail for more. Here, the love stories are quiet, the courage is real, and the last word is always worth the wait. Until the next trail.